Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to introduce this research. Is something we are working on, so it's a work in progress at the moment, as this presentation is part of a European project we are working that is called Links. So you can see there are a lot of names among the authors, and so I would like to mention rapidly then we have Anne Bach-Nielsen from University of Copenhagen, Nina Blom Andersen and Josephine Theissen from University College of Copenhagen, and Matteo Putilli, that is my colleague at the University of Florence. And yeah, has told this this work is part of the Links project. You can see here a link, but in general, the project is focused on how social media and crowdsourcing can support disaster risk management. And in this project, we are working on different case studies that are focused on different kind of hazards in 4 different European countries. So we have the Danish case that I will present briefly today, and that is focused on flooding. Then we have the drought case in Germany, where we have also a second case that is about terror attacks. Then we have industrial hazards in Netherlands, and last one is the earthquake case in Italy. So we have really different cases, not all focused on climate change, but 2 of them, yes. So we decided to participate to present how we are focusing on this specific case that is the Danish one, as I mentioned before. In the project, I am responsible for one of the work packages, and in particular, I'm working on disaster risk perception and vulnerability. So the purpose of our work in this work package is to understand how the increasing role of online technologies, as you can see in the slide, in disaster risk communication is opening further concerns on how vulnerability and its spatial distribution are shaped by technologies, and how technologies may effectively support the monitoring of vulnerability during disasters and guide the relief and support and response. So starting from this point, we have done some work on literature review and some local case studies and about the connections and the relationship between social media and crowdsourcing using disasters and vulnerability, so how they can reduce or increase the vulnerabilities in different contexts. And we have observed as one of the main concerns about the way in which big data in particular are used to represent vulnerability in disasters and guide the action of the relief system is quite problematic in terms of capacity to represent of the community. So there is a high issue about accessibility of the technologies and the communication systems. That is one of the main challenges we have identified and we are working on. And so this moved us also to think about what is the meaning of accessibility, how we can define accessibility to technology. So because not only issue about material availability of the technologies, but there are also a lot of kind of different aspects that can be considered. For example, cultural accessibility or aspects related to the physical and sensory disabilities that can affect the capacity to use the systems or to access effectively to some platforms. Or there are also aspects connected to the capacity to be recognized into the system. So this is a strong issue about social justice that we are considering. So I effectively recognized by the authorities, they are aware of my needs, and so they are able to give me the possibility to receive adequate response during the emergencies. And another aspect we have identified is, and we are working on, is about how technologies shape also aspects of connectivity and mobility. So if effectively people are able to connect socially with the others to be part of the networks, and also we are considering how technologies that should support me, for example, in evacuation procedures, if they effectively can support everyone, and what are the limits of these technologies and so on. So the way we are considering vulnerability, so the way we approach vulnerability is and the idea to consider vulnerability as a dynamic property. And so moving from the static idea that try to identify specific groups as vulnerable, but try to understand how there are some processes and dynamics and situations that can change constantly this geographical distribution of the vulnerability on the territory. So our approach is really contextual, reconnecting to what also Francesca told at the beginning, so the need to go strictly on the local case level and to consider how vulnerability can be differently conceptualized in the different contexts, according especially aspects of historical, cultural dynamics that shape it differently and constantly in the time. So we have also started to observe we have also focused on the intersectionality literature, so that is becoming relevant in studies about vulnerability, and we think this is one of the best approaches at the moment to discuss and consider vulnerability in these dynamic ways. So these are only a short figure to show how we have tried to conceptualize the vulnerability in our project. And that's told this approach, this dynamic approach that consider also intersectionality is strictly related to issues about social justice, and so also to issues about climate justice when we speak about the cases that are connected to climate change aspects. And we have tried to move from the idea as told that there are specific groups that are all the time vulnerable, but that there are some conditions that can change through the time and places, and that can modify the way we consider vulnerability. And especially we have focused on three concepts that I mentioned before, so accessibility, connectivity, and mobility. This is an old figure because we are developing it more according to the results we are receiving in the project. So how, moving to the case that probably is more interesting, I would like to briefly present how we have adopted this discussion about vulnerability in the specific case of Frederiksberg, that is a municipality into the municipality, because Frederiksberg is a municipality that is located in the city center of Copenhagen. And it is a really high density area, and it is also a really wealthy municipality. It is considered one of the richest parts of this territory. And so we focused on this case because it sounded us really interested to try to challenge a bit and discuss about vulnerability in a place that apparently is considered not so vulnerable in a traditional way, because it can be considered still the rich place with a lot of good services of the municipality. Is really active, and the population has a high level of trust in the work that the institutions do in the territory. So it became really interesting to try to understand their perspective and how vulnerability can have different ways to be interpreted and represented in the different territories. So why Frederiksberg? Another point is about obviously the challenges connected to vulnerability, to climate change. So we can see that this area is quite high exposed to the effects of the increase of rains, and especially they are experiencing situation of cloudburst. And you can see here some figures, two maps. One is representing the flood map of a 100-year event, and the other one is about the actions in terms of adaptations, so initiatives that the municipality is taking in the area. And you can see also a picture about the last strong flood that hit in the city, and the third picture is about one of the awareness campaign that the municipality launched in the territory.
Sorry, 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Okay, yes, perfect. And now you can see that what we have done, or better, what the Danish partners have done, because this was their job. And they did this, a lot of series of interviews in the municipality, asking especially to specific stakeholders, and they also have done some focus groups with citizens, trying to understand how they think about how they can define vulnerability, what is the vulnerability, is they see some challenges related to it, and so how we can move also to solve them. What was interesting in the answers that we have collected is that in general, the way they defined vulnerability was really static. So they did not perceive vulnerability as something representing the territory, because the STeDe is a wealthy area, and so they think about everything quite working well. So the representation of vulnerability is mainly connected to specific social groups that traditionally are considered vulnerable, like minors, elderly people, and so on, without considering the adaptive and resilience capacity that these parts of the population could also have. And they were also considering that usually vulnerability should be associated mainly to poor people, so low-income people, but this was not specifically relevant in their context. So this is why I'm saying that they have this static representation of vulnerability. So what this produces? This produces challenges in recognizing vulnerability in the territory, because obviously if I adopt this approach to define vulnerability, I'm not able to see how effectively my community could be vulnerable in specific situations and conditions. And it's also showing, says vulnerability it can be considered a social construct. So how there are some cultural and social processes that shape it in terms of conceptualization, and how this can affect also the response capacity has told. And the consequence of all this process was that the authorities did not recognize the need to produce a specific communication focused on the vulnerability, and they so this produced not an adequate communication in front of specific situations. This could have also potential effects on the risk awareness of the community, because if I'm not talking about vulnerability and I will not recognize it, especially in a territory like this one, where there is a strong trust between citizens and authorities, the risk is that authorities not able to effectively identify, understand vulnerability in the territory. Also, the communities don't recognize it. The other process we have observed is that the community does not think that it's necessary to take adequate actions to answer to specific situations, because they think that authorities are not able to do this for them. So going towards the end, because I know that I have a few seconds, we have these open also issues about inclusiveness, because what we have discovered is the point is that if I'm not able to observe and to adopt a vulnerability perspective, dynamic perspective on vulnerability, I could also produce situations of social exclusions without seeing them. So this is the challenge, the main challenge we are working on. So only last slide is to show you that we are now working with the purpose to provide some solutions that can help local stakeholders to apply this dynamic perspective on vulnerability. And obviously using social media crowdsourcing has that systems of communication. And the really last one is about how also crowd mapping could work in this process, because this municipality is really a lot working in terms of participatory actions. So the next steps of our work will also to try to understand how effectively this dynamic approach can be applied in promoting better crowd mapping in considering climate change effects on the territory. So thank you very much for your attention.